This is a momentous day for Julian Assange. You've spoken to many of the stakeholders this morning.
I certainly have. It is a momentous day for Julian Assange, but of course, more broadly, I think, for issues around press freedom, for the advocacy for an Australian citizen that our own government has really, since the election of the Albanese government, really invested in at the highest levels, and it's been intense. The fact, I think, that we've even seen this morning Kevin Rudd travelling with him, also Stephen Smith. These are really senior people deployed by our government to travel with Julian Assange to go to this court hearing. And so it is a momentous day, and it's been a 14-year standoff, right? This is a sort of period of time that is unfathomable. The fact that he's even in good enough health. I mean, I was speaking to people who were concerned about his health really till very much this story broke. And yet we've seen, I'm not saying that he doesn't have any health issues still, undoubtedly he will, and there will be ongoing issues. But the fact that he was being able to board this plane, come to Saipan and then make his way on to Australia, it is a really big deal. And a couple of points on this. One of the significant things, I think, is, and it is a moment for us in terms of a national, I don't mean to be too parochial, but I'm going to have a moment where we do expect our governments to be advocates for us, right? And that is the source of national pride for us, that our government does advocate for us as citizens. And on that level, I think this is really significant that our government has done the work to advocate for Julian Assange's release. As all citizens, I mean, it's not just about this one individual man. We expect that of our government. It's one of the things we're very proud of our democracy, and democracies around the world are proud of. This has been a long-running campaign, and so it didn't just happen on its own. In the previous parliament, we didn't see the same support from Scott Morrison, the previous Prime Minister for Julian Assange. We have seen a significant shift, and I think that shift has been quite significant in delivering the outcome we're seeing. And it really brings to an end what has been a difficult issue between Australia and the US. Now, I still think it's been a difficult issue, although on the record, I put this to Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, this morning on my program, and he said, no, it's been fine, this issue, it's just such a strong relationship. Now, he's right, the US-Australia alliance is extremely strong, and it was certainly not going to be upended by this issue, but it was a difficulty in so much as our Prime Minister had to constantly raise it. He took it to the highest levels, even in his talks with Joe Biden, the US President, and so getting an outcome there does matter. Now, you asked who I've been speaking to. I spoke to Kathy Lepp, for instance. She, her former husband, of course, was instrumental in kind of keeping him in their attic, as she told me. Jeffrey Robinson and her kept him and looked after him as he was getting legal advice. She talked about what a complex character he is. She said herself that he is really divisive in the community. But even though he's divisive and there's ongoing debates about all of that, I think there has been a sense of broad unity in our country that this needed to be closed and brought to an end, and it has been closed well before the US election as well. So a really significant moment. The reason people are still being cautious, though, is until it's settled, until he's on Australian soil, and he's expected to fly to Canberra later tonight. Until that happens, we, of course, will be cautious about, declaring it all over.
Yeah, and just to explain to our viewers, we had that live shot earlier. It has been shut off for the moment, but as soon as we get that again, we will bring that to you and any developments there, of course. Now, PK, you said, of course, this is a big deal. Tell us about the deal itself and the compromise that's had to be made here.
It's a good point you make. There is a compromise. He has to plead guilty to one count in the Espionage Act. And so he hasn't been pardoned. He does carry that. There is a sort of sentence that goes with that. The deal, though, is still favourable, although not ideal, his supporters say. No one who's been an advocate of Julian Assange says this is exactly what they wanted. That's why it is a deal.
And actually, PK, if we can break in, the breaking news
excellent.
Here now is that he has pleaded guilty to one criminal charge in the US District Court. That's at Saipan. So it is a conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defence information. It carries a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. When asked if he was prepared to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, Mr Assange said yes. When asked on the specific charge charge. Mr Assange said guilty. So that breaking news coming through, and as you were explaining, PK, this is a compromise here.
That's right. So that's the deal, and he's voiced the language that, of course, somebody who is before a US court must, which is to agree to that charge, which he has. That's the deal that's been made. That deal, though, involves crediting, if I can call it that, I think we can call it that, crediting the time that he's already served. And, of course, he served many years in jail. He was also holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy separately. He has really done a lot of time in the Belmarsh prison, and so that has been accounted for. That's why it's a deal that allows for him to be free, and why, on balance, his legal team and Julian Assange himself had made the decision that, given his frailty, given his mental health, given how long this has gone on, that this was, like anything, we accept compromises in life when things are, well, if I can be really blunt, according to the people I've spoken to, quite unbearable. And what the situation he's been in has been unbearable for him. So now he's able to, when he does make it to Australia, reunite with his wife, with his 2 children. And Kathy Lett, who is a good friend of his, Australian author, Australian royalty in the kind of literary world, said to me, he's barely spent any time with these children. Right? So if you think about the kind of things he has to do now, it's enormous emotionally to regroup with a family he has not been able to be a father and a husband to in the way that people who are free are able to do. And so all of that will happen. There are some other issues which I just want to talk about, which I think may emerge as bigger issues. One issue is the cost of getting him to Australia. It's been kind of reported to be nearly $800,000. Richard Marles, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, was asked about that and whether they would waive that kind of charge that the Australian government has invested. He said no. And that's an interesting response. I don't know, I'm reading the tea leaves here a little bit, but we are in a cost of living crisis. Perhaps the government just thinks that's a bridge too far. And so there is a campaign to fundraise to pay for that. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money but we do help people come back to Australia. So I wonder if there'll be more pressure on the Australian government to waive that fee in coming days. I certainly observed that among our listeners on the text line, people sort of thinking, why wouldn't we settle this bill? But we'll see where that lands. And then, of course, there will be an enormous public appetite to hear more from Julian Assange, who will be in Australia, which seems so odd after so long, but back in Australia. Politicians in this parliament, I want to be really specific about that because previous parliaments have not been so sympathetic, really have drawn the line in this case. I think the Deputy Prime Minister was interesting this morning, saying to me that doesn't mean you approve of everything he's done, but that it's a separate issue. So, yes, right now he's pled guilty to that one count. That means that deal is currently being exercised in the legal way that it is. So nerves will be decreasing, and then I suspect when it's settled, he'll be back on a plane on his way to Australia.